love taking my kids to the beach, even just for a couple of minutes in these really uncertain times. But what I especially love about the beach is when I get a chance to think about weathering and erosion. Yeah, I know, Serabian is a nerd, but let's face it, weathering and erosion is something that we have to deal with on a constant basis. We just don't really think too much about it. But you'd be surprised at how many different things around you have to do with weathering and erosion in some form. Don't believe me? Well, we're here for a few minutes. Let's check it out. What's an example of weathering and erosion? My kids.
Hi.
What my daughter Kara is doing right now is she's pushing sand into a pile. So technically this is actually an example of erosion taking place because she's transporting the sand from one location to another, and sand is technically rock. Erosion because he's picking up rocks and he's moving them over to the water. And then what he's going to do is he's going to take it and he's going to throw it. Yep. And what he just did was he threw rocks. So technically, that's an example of erosion, transporting rocks from one place to another place. But funny enough, you could also make the argument that he's also an example of weathering, because as the stuff falls down, it knocks into other rocks and other sediments, potentially breaking them down into smaller pieces. Isn't that right, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's an example of weathering and erosion? The water. Now, I know the waves crashing back and forth on this stream isn't exactly what you would expect in terms of big waves, but it's amazing how you can actually see the water starting to carve out the shoreline area. You can actually see it working away. And the funny thing too is you can even see it in the rocks and some of the other materials that are along the shore. If I pick up one of these rocks, like one of these little guys over here, this is a generic rock that's been weathered away. So this was actually probably at one point in time a really sharp piece of quartz that's been gently washed back and forth over and over again, bumped along the shoreline area, and has now become very smooth. This is an example of weathering. Erosion is, of course, when the water goes back, or when the rock goes back in and is pulled back by the water. You can also see in other pieces, like over here, this is really kind of nice. This is actually a piece of glass. Now, normally it would be really sharp, but it's actually very smooth along the outside. So a lot of people call this shore glass, I call it beach glass, but this is also something that has been weathered and worn out over a period of time. This is actually kind of cool. This is actually, believe it or not, a piece of blacktop. And this blacktop is gently and gradually over the course of time getting weathered away into a smaller and smoother piece of rock. We also have over here, this looks like a piece of porcelain, like a plate or something. So this is also an example of weathering and erosion because gradually over the time, this is also going to get smoothed out as well. What else is an example of weathering and erosion? Yep, potholes. Potholes are actually an example of really interesting weathering and erosion in the context that where do cracks and these holes come from? Very simple, rain and ice. What happens is as the rain comes down, it actually sinks into the teeny tiny cracks that end up inside of blacktop as time goes by. And when that water freezes, the water expands, the ice expands, and that breaks up these little cracks into bigger cracks. And that's why you get these really big chunks of blacktop that all of a sudden are breaking apart. You can see all the way up and down here. So the weathering takes place when the water freezes, turns to ice, and causes the blacktop cracks to actually expand. And then unfortunately what happens is that then they are eroded away by cars. The cars will actually kick up these stones and then cause them to travel into the grasses. So potholes, specifically big ones like this and even the smaller ones, are also an example of weathering and erosion. What else is an example of weathering and erosion? This, a flowing stream. Now it may not look like much, but it's funny how this can actually affect rocks and other land areas. It's a slow-moving stream, not moving very fast, but the sheer current of the water itself can cause rocks to be worn down and broken apart and then cause them to travel up and down this way. Let me show you. Come here, take a look at this. This is the results of weathering and erosion taking place. This simple slow-moving stream can sometimes rise high during the times of not just high tide, but also of during storms. And you can see what has happened. All this blacktop has been broken away or weathered due to the rising water. And if I go down even lower, you can see it's not just one level of blacktop, it's actually a couple levels of blacktop. And you can see now all of these pieces of concrete and blacktop eroding into the stream. What's even cooler is that if I back up once again, you can actually see how much ground used to be here before the weathering and erosion took place. That dark line at the bottom indicates how much land used to be here, but now how much land has been gradually weathered away and eroded away over the course of, I would say, probably about a decade or so. We're looking at well over a foot worth of weathering and erosion taking place. Where does it all go? That way. Up and down this stream. Chances are pretty good if this tide was actually a little bit lower, I could probably take a walk all the way up and down here and I could probably see at least several pieces of blacktop and concrete. And funny enough, just that arching and that curvature of the stream indicates that even more weathering and erosion is taking place. Well, weathering and erosion. So that's a little bit of a recap about weathering and erosion, and that's kind of the next assignment that we would like you guys to do. I would actually like you guys to take a look around in your local neighborhood, whether it be the parks or even your own backyard or even at home. What are some examples of weathering and erosion taking place in your home? Where are they? How do you know that it's weathering and erosion? What is the evidence? So that's what I'd like you guys to do over the course of this next week. So, where are my kids? I better go find them. This is Mr. Serabian. See you next time. Stay healthy, stay safe.